Welcome back, everybody. You were listening to SeeThroughPanel, a comic book discussion and review podcast. My name is Cole Harvey. I'm here with Fahed Rahman.
Hello.
Today, we're going to be doing something a little different. So, we recorded 2 episodes in the last few weeks, both of which have been eaten by gremlins. So, this will be the first of our makeup recordings here. This is Beautiful Darkness by Fabian Vellman and Carrascoet on art. We've recorded this probably a 40-minute recording, nice long discussion. And it's been a few weeks since then, so apologies if we have trouble remembering anything or if we miss some stuff because we already did this once.
Yes, and I'll give kind of a brief explanation of what Beautiful Darkness is. So, Beautiful Darkness is a graphic novel. It's the story about people the size of fruit flies that are expelled from their home and thrust into the outside world. The novel tells the story of Aurora, a sweet girl who finds herself taking a leadership role in the community of tiny people. The story starts out with a whimsical tone, but rapidly devolves into a morbid narrative. Much of the plot revolves around Aurora. Small segments of the story focus on Size's characters, who serve to emphasize the contrast between the daunting situation at hand and the playful way that the characters interact. Okay, so I think that's the kind of description from Wikipedia, which I think's pretty accurate as to what the story is really. So do you want to, this was one of your choices, so do you want to explain again how you came across the novel and why you've kind of chosen it to be discussed?
Yes, so this was about a couple of years ago. I found this book when I was looking through really good European comics. I believe it's French, I'm not sure. Any of the Franco-Belgian comics, I was looking through those, and I saw this was pretty acclaimed. Not known or talked about a lot in the States, but yeah, I picked it up. I've read it probably 3 or 4 times now. I just loved it, so I thought maybe we could record, and then luckily, if I had enjoyed it as well.
Yeah, it was I'd actually read this a few years ago, so it was nice
Hmm.
to get reacquainted with the story. And I've read it long enough ago to where I'd actually forgotten a lot of what had happened in the plot. So it was actually nice rediscovering uh the artwork and the characters, and just the story itself as well, really.
Yeah. So this isn't either of our first time reading it, but it's kind of new in terms of how long it's been since we read it. So it felt like a first read for me because it had been, yeah, about a year and a half, 2 years since I'd read it. I guess I'll break into the plot initially. Going to do kind of a quick plot rundown. We are introduced to Aurora, our main character. As Fahed said, these small, I guess, fruit fly sized people who are quickly ejected from their home that we discover is a little girl, a normal sized girl, and they're all kind of coming out of her ears and her mouth, and she is dead on the ground. And they escape into the wilderness, the full size wilderness. Turns kind of into a survival, more about human nature, kind of. I'm not sure. It seems to me it's about the horrors people can do when they're forced to live in a circumstance like this.
Yeah, I think so. I think when we was discussing it last time, I think the phrase we came across, it was kind of Lord of the Flies by way of Studio Ghibli. I
Yeah.
think is kind of, there is a lot of whimsy, and um it's kind of, I don't know if you've seen the old Moomin cartoons, but it's got that sort of like, whimsical way that a lot of the characters interact with each other, contrasted with some absolutely brutal actions as well. It's very much about these group of people trying to survive, and some of the terrible decisions that they make in order to do so.
Yeah, the it is horrifying in that way. I wouldn't call it a horror book, but it's horrifying in some of the things that you see or some of the things that you read. Very unsettling as on the whole, but it's also very beautiful to look at because Carrascoet, who is a partnership, I believe it's 2 people. The art in this book is incredible. It is watercolor most of the time with very bright, vivid colors, and the small people are drawn in this cartoony style that really it clashes but blends in the same time, just kind of working perfectly with this very, I would say, pretty realistic watercolor style for the backgrounds and everything.
Yes, I think we kind of discussed the the actual background and the kind of the forest and the trees and the buildings are illustrated in a very kind of realistic style, whereas the characters themselves, kind of Aurora and Prince Hector, are they look like cartoon characters that wouldn't be out of place in a Cartoon Network or a Nickelodeon show.
Yeah, and that kind of that visually matches up with the tone and the themes of this, I think, because that's kind of how the story progresses as well. As it starts out very innocent, and then before long, you're seeing things that are pretty brutal, pretty horrible, and it kind of the tone of it changes. The one of my favorite parts about the art is the animals when they come into view. If this was a cartoony looking animal, it wouldn't have the same effect. But these are very hyper realistic, very large compared to our characters, animals that seem like a real danger anytime they're on the page. And that's for me when I really notice the difference in style is when you have like a squirrel, but it looks terrifying because it's next to a girl the size of a fly.
Yeah, that's yeah. There's kind of a lot of interesting interplay between kind of the real world animals and the kind of creatures that have, I say creatures, these tiny people that have kind of been exiled from the girl's body, in terms of kind of like there's scenes of the kind of birds swooping down and eating some of the little people. There's rats and squirrels and yeah, all sorts of realistically um, drawn animals as compared to the more cartoony characters there. So yeah, so spoilers from here on out. You've been warned. So basically, the plot is around Aurora. As she takes this leadership position, and kind of the main relationships in the novel are between Aurora, Prince Hector, and this other character called Zeely. And it's there's you know Aurora is this kind of, so Aurora is actually the name of the girl that's passed away. So early on in the story, see kind of they find a notebook with Aurora's name on it, and Aurora says, "Well, that's me," but it's also the name of the little girl. So we was kind of discussing in the previous episode
Mm-hmm.
whether that's kind of whether the different creatures are different elements of the girl's personality.
Yep.
So that's kind of something that we discussed earlier as well.
Yeah, I think that's still I still hold on to that as kind of the main thrust for me now that we've talked about it is yeah, our Aurora, our main character is kind of either a conglomeration of all the parts of the larger Aurora or is like the most personal and true part. I can't decide which would be the case, but yeah, you kind of have these characters broken up into what I assume is different aspects that make up a human being, and that really, once you start looking for that, it really changes up the story.
Yeah, it's kind of very. We discussed this before. It's kind of reminiscent, even though this came out before the movie did, but it's kind of very reminiscent of Inside Out, where kind of you've got these
Mm-hmm.
different emotions represented by different characters. So yeah, it's very much kind of using you know physical manifestations of different emotions and different character traits.
Yeah. Essentially, the story progresses. Good thing we gave a spoiler warning. It's about to. I'm just going to go straight through it. Um, Aurora takes a leadership position, begins helping everyone. Everyone's pretty much getting along at this point, giving out food and making shelters. And eventually, there is a one of the big changing factors that kind of makes life harder and makes people descend kind of quickly into this hostile mood. Is I believe there's a cat, or I think it's a cat, comes and just destroys a lot of the living area, eats the food, So it's even more desperate of a struggle now. And at this point, I'm just flipping through the book, and I realized at this point already we have the large little girl with the black hair who eats the smaller one.
Yeah,
That
yeah,
happens way earlier than I had thought. So people get hungry, and one of the characters just tosses her friend in her mouth and swallows her, which is probably the first awful thing I think to
yeah.
happen.
And I think it's really representative of the tone of the novel, because it's it's a horrific thing that happens. It's a terrible thing that happens, but it's treated kind of like whimsically in a way. It's kind of like this, oh well, that was a bit of a naughty thing you did there, rather than kind of like, oh, that's absolutely horrific. So yeah, that was I think that is a perfect scene that encapsulate kind of the tone of the novel. It's not a horror story, but there's this kind of creeping sense of dread about that permeates through the entire story.
Yeah, that's definitely where it first hits. It's very unsettling. It's not something like Junji Ito style that'll make you turn your head away from the page and be horrified, but it's very unsettling, and then it kind of slowly starts to build, and that feeling gets stronger and stronger, and um, by the end of the thing, it is a kind of a draining book in my opinion because it's just so awful. But yeah, it's very playful at the beginning, at least, especially with the girl eating the other girl. She just says, the other one's like, "What did you just do?" And she just says, "Want to play? I'm pregnant." And then they start pretending like the girl they just ate is like a baby in her stomach.
Yeah,
So it's
that's
mighty uncomfortable.
yeah, very, very, very uncomfortable. The dialogue in the book is really tight. I felt kind of for a translated work, I think the translator did a superb job of kind of keeping the tone right, because I can imagine, that the French have got a particular sense of humor and a particular way of looking at things. So I'm just thinking, you know, in the how this would have read in the native French. So it's, that's another thing I think I don't think we really talked about in the previous discussion that we had.
No, we didn't really mention dialogue, and that's a good point because the dialogue in this is very, very nice. It's very, it's held back. There's not a ton, in my opinion, and
It's
it's
beautifully
all,
lettered. It's really beautifully
yeah.
lettered. Yeah.
I like the way, just kind of an aside. Uh, a lot of European comics in general have like the rectangular speech bubbles, and everything looks a little bit less computer generated than if you're picking up like a DC comic and it's all looks the same. And the lettering is very nice, and the dialogue is it's short, it's snappy, and it kind of there's enough of it where you get everything, but just not too much in terms of like if you want to be unsettled by something, you don't want it to be like reading two paragraphs about how horrible it was in the dialogue.
Yeah. The visuals do most of the heavy lifting.
Exactly.
Um, it's interesting, kind of what you mentioned about the um, square speech bubbles and stuff like that. Kind of lettering, I think, is a very underrated, art. I think it's something that it's almost as an afterthought. Sometimes I feel
Oh
there's a
yeah.
really great YouTube channel called Strip Panel Naked, and it's run by a guy that's a letterer by trade. He actually lettered that horror comic that we did a few episodes back.
Black Stars Above,
Yeah,
or
Black
was it?
Stars
Yeah.
Above. Yeah, so he runs a really excellent YouTube channel that kind of looks at lettering and how panels are composed and how that kind of affects the flow of the story. And he very much talks about how people think they can just go into like Photoshop and just place down a dialogue box without kind of thinking about, actually you need to think about placement, shape, how much kerning and stuff like that you put between the letters and space between lines, and making sure that you're not overshadowing the text, overshadowing the images as well. And I think this book does that very, very well. It kind of there's a lot of kind of it gives the lettering that is there gives gives enough space for the images to kind of breathe. Really,
Yeah, definitely. Especially with art like this, with the very lush backgrounds and everything. Any mistake on the lettering would cover up something in terms of there's always something on the page to be looking at, and you want to be kind of spare with the space you use in the lettering, and I think they do that super well. Not to mention just that the dialogue makes it pretty short.
yeah. And I think the other thing is that the characters' faces are all super expressive, so
Yeah.
you don't really need that much text to kind of get an idea of what they're thinking or feeling or trying to hide from each other.
Yeah, that's the good thing about the cartoony style on the characters is that you can do these kind of over the top expressions. Whereas if everything was drawn in this hyper realistic style, the background is, they'd be a little more held back, I think. So with the cartoony characters, it really makes it easy to tell what they're thinking.
Yeah. So I think we should kind of run through quickly the main cast. So we've got Aurora, we've got Plim. So I'm just reading off the Wikipedia page for this, and I think they've got quite apt descriptions of the characters. So Aurora is the protagonist. Plim is Aurora's cold-hearted friend. Hector
Yeah.
is the object of Aurora's affection. Zeely is the manipulative main antagonist. Jane is a mysterious woman who lives in the forest. Timothy is Aurora's one-eyed friend. Rat is Rat, and uh, they say the man in the stories they describe him as a giant. So I
Okay.
think that's quite an interesting choice of words there. It's not a way that I'd thought about the story before. Kind of like
Yeah.
these tiny characters are living in a land of giants. So that's
Kind of
an
gives it a
interesting.
fairy tale kind of vibe.
Yes. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
interesting. I guess yeah, that kind of changes how I'm reading the ending. But yeah, I think that is most of the main characters. The rest of them are there's a lot of I think maybe they're not unnamed, but relatively unnamed side characters that you
Yeah.
see get horrific things done to them. But that's most of the main cast.
Yeah. So I think we kind of talked about a bit about before, kind of how much, well, how despicable some of these characters are. So I was like, Prince Hector, I just think is utterly awful. He's just this foppish, uh, ineffectual. He's supposed to be prince. He's supposed to be kind of taking care of his people and leading and stuff like that. But he's more concerned about how comfortable he is and how good he's supposed to be looking, and the manipulative Zeely, who's just awful gaslighting, um, mean girl type character uh, as well. So, and through the course of the story, kind of Zeely manages to, through manipulation and kind of negging and belittling and bullying and cajoling, the other characters, manages to gain control of the community.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, Zeely is pretty much the most awful character in this. I wanted to go back to Hector because he said ineffectual, which I think is probably the best word to describe Hector. He's the kind of guy that will just be lazing around and say he's going to go do something super helpful for the group and then come back 3 minutes later and just kind of, say it couldn't be done or say he tried his best. He'll say he'll do something and then he'll give it 1% of his effort and then he'll stop. And that's essentially what he does for the entire book. And it is annoying, to say
Yeah,
the
it's
least.
very, very annoying until Zeely asks, what does Zeely ask him to do that kind of gets him killed in the end? He has to try and rescue.
I think he gets eaten by a frog because he's rescuing like
I'm
a
just, yeah, I'm
ribbon.
just,
It's a little it's a ribbon that falls into this little pool of water, and he needs to go get it. And he paddles out there on a leaf, and then gets eaten by a toad, and that's the end of Hector.
yeah, and that's the end of Hector. There are some, I'm just going through the book again now, and there's, scenes of them eating a rat. There's scenes of, I think for me, the most horrific, horrifying scene in there is when they uh, bury Timothy alive.
Yeah,
because like Zeeley kind of sees Timothy as this like deformed mutant creature that's doesn't deserve to be part of the community, and he just passively accepts his fate and just gets inside the bag and is buried alive. And at the time he's looking after a baby, and kind of everyone just leaves the baby alone. And obviously we don't see the baby's face, but I think we can. It's kind of inferred that the baby passes away as well.
yeah, left alone by itself. Yeah, that is definitely the worst part of the book in terms of kind of a subtler horror. It's yeah, the being buried alive thing isn't as bad as the fact that Timothy just kind of lays down and takes it and doesn't say a word.
Yeah, it's a
Um,
very it's very I don't know, kind of it's a fascinating decision for the writers to take there. And I'm trying to reading it again, I'm trying to figure out what they're trying to get at with that, in terms of what part of Aurora that represents.
I don't know. I think it's the I always saw Timothy as when they are exposed for I guess being disfigured, they have one eye. I think they kind of think all of the bad things that they say. I think Timothy thinks that about themselves. So when they offer this like escape route, essentially, I think Timothy just takes it, which made it even more depressing for me. But that's how I kind of looked at it,
Yeah,
um, which is
yeah,
awful. But one of the most graphically horrifying, maybe not nearly as mentally horrifying as the Timothy part, was earlier on when there's these set of, I think originally they're triplets, or is they just twins, and they're copying each other all the time. And one of them goes up to a bird's nest and pretends to be a baby bird to get food from the mother while the mother's
oh
feeding.
yes,
And it is the bird just kind of jams its beak down the little twin's throat, and then his mouth's just kind of like this gaping red hole, and that is like that's like only the second thing that happens besides the woman eating the other girl, like I talked
yeah,
about earlier. That's the second bad thing, and that escalated very quickly.
yes,
I
yeah.
remember that all the time.
There's a lot of humor in the book. We kind of talked a lot about the kind of horrific aspects, but there's some quite funny and witty moments as well. I found that bit quite funny. Kind of, he's just got his mouth open and he's kind of
Yeah,
calling down, calling down to his siblings, saying, "Oh, that was a bit unpleasant." And I'm trying to think what other, kind of the way Hector kind of generally behaves with his kind of troop of sycophants. I found that quite amusing as well. They're kind of like rah rah rahing around him a lot, and he's just kind of posing there and taking. Yeah, it's just I found that quite humorous as well.
yeah. Hector has a funny moment. I think he says he's going to hunt, and he starts kind of hacking down blades of grass with his sword as he walks. And then there's a panel skip, and he's like 20 feet ahead. He's like, "All right, let's take a break."
Yeah, it's kind of very much indicative of his character arc, really.
Yeah, gets nothing done and just looks like an ass the whole time.
Yeah, looking busy doing nothing. So, um, kind of looking at the conclusion of the book, uh, what happens towards the end is Aurora's kind of basically had enough of the group, and she decides, you know what, sack you lot. I'm gonna go live with my mate Jane in the giant's house. I don't want to help you guys anymore. You've kind of rejected me time and time again, and I think it'd be better if I'm by myself. And she she basically gets followed into the into the into the shack by Zeely and the rest of the group, and that's where kind of the final confrontation of the story takes place. And we won't do complete spoilers because we would like you to kind of discover what happens in the end for yourself. But that was, I think, it's a beautifully plotted and beautifully paced book. It's a very smooth read. There wasn't any places where the tempo sagged or it was difficult to read. So it was, yeah,
Yeah, I would agree. One of the biggest things in this book is the pacing. It reads very quickly, and it's also very it entices you to do a reread. I think
How many pages is it? It's kind of, I think we discussed this last time. It's
94.
94 pages, and it does just fly by.
Oh
And
yeah,
I think part of that is the panel composition. Part of that is due to the fact that there's, I wouldn't say it's sparsely dialogued, but the dialogue doesn't take a lot of space up on the page.
yeah. It's very
And
quick
the
dialogue.
and because the characters have got quite big expressions and they're easy to read, it's kind of very simple to tell what's going on in terms of the action. He does action. The artists do action really really well. There's a few good action set pieces in here in the book as well. I'm kind of thinking about kind of Aurora, kind of. I don't want to give spoilers for that bit, but Aurora, Aurora gets into a scrap with one of the woodland animals, and that's kind of quite beautifully illustrated. The scenes with um, the robin as well. That's kind of
Yep.
beautifully illustrated as well. So they're able, the artists responsible were able to kind of do everything from the small intimate moments to kind of like, I wouldn't say there's any big action set pieces, but the kind of the more actiony bits as well.
Yeah, I think a big part of what makes the book so fast, like you said, is just the legibility, the readability of the panels. You can glance quickly at any panel without reading the dialogue and understand what's happening to it. And the pages are the panels are set up in a way that reads so quickly and so fluidly that for a 94-page book, a 94-page graphic novel doesn't take long to read anyway, but this reads faster than any other graphic novel of this size that I've read, just because unless you really take a moment to look at all the details of the art, which you should, it is, yeah, you just breeze right through it because everything's just so easy to see. You don't have to stare at it to see what the characters are thinking because of their cartoony expressions. There's nothing hidden. Everything is kind of out in the open, and that really brings the pace of the book up to another level that I feel like all of this kind of promotes a reread in my mind because you can read it so quickly, but there's so much more to
Yeah,
it.
there's a kind of a lot of depth. There's, I'm just looking at the panels now, and there's one section. I think it starts on the copy that I've got, 48, where Aurora, big Aurora, giant Aurora, is sleeping on the floor, and she kind of wakes up, and then I think it's the is that cannibal baby that's kind of like screaming and waking up. So it kind of makes you think, well, is that another aspect of Aurora
Oh,
inside there as well? So yeah, so it's kind of like re-noticing things that are going on in the book as well.
that is
So
very nice. I hadn't noticed that.
yeah, so it's definitely one that kind of uh, rewards rereading uh, time and time again. It's I think that for me this is, when people talk, when we was talking last time about kind of the list of like the great graphic novels, I don't see many of those lists kind of mentioning this one, and I really do think it deserves to be on those lists. It's a really remarkable achievement. I mean, truly, the kind of the marrying of the art with this really difficult to manage tone. I mean, I can't
Yeah.
remember. There's not many other kind of stories where it's got this tone and it kind of like walks this knife edge between whimsy and terror and character development. It's just, yeah, it's just fantastic.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah. I think something like this is kind of the perfect package, and there's not, I'm just scanning my bookshelves here. There's really nothing to compare it to
Yeah,
at all.
we had, when we were discussing it last time, kind of if there's another movie or TV show to, to make a comparison to this, and it's just like I can't really think of anything. I really can't.
No, no, there's really not because I don't know if this tone could be pulled off in a lot of other mediums because visually, if you were to do something like this in a movie, I think it would veer to straight horror because of the things that take place in it, and you couldn't really capture that whimsical tone because that also comes a lot from the drawing. I really think this is kind of a type of story that can only be told in this medium.
It's the type of this story I think could only be told as effectively as it is told in this medium. I don't think,
Yeah,
I think you're absolutely right. I don't think if it was an animation or a live action or a poem or whatever else, whatever other medium you want to come up with, that it'd be as affecting as it is in this format.
yeah, definitely agree. And it would be a bit short. I feel like too because of the pace of this. Pace is so different in comics than it is in any other medium that if you page for page animated this, I feel like it would be 20 minutes long.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I think I can imagine some of the sequence being lengthened. I'm particularly thinking of the marriage between Hector and Zeely. I can imagine that being a far longer
Yeah,
sequence in the animation, um, and maybe some of the stuff about. We haven't talked about the man in the woods either. Kind of, it's never said that the girl's been murdered, but I think when we was discussing it before, we both assumed that the girl had been murdered, and it kind of we both assumed that the man in the woods was responsible. But yeah, like I said last time, the creators said, "Well, there's nowhere in the text that says that's what's happened. There's nowhere in the text that says that she's been murdered. And then there's kind of no marks on the body."
yeah, completely unharmed looking, and yeah, I mean it's open to interpretation. That's probably the easiest. That's what I jumped to when I first read it, but it's really yeah, it's open, and the man in the woods is kind of the mystery element.
Yes, kind of just one of those things when you see kind of like dead girl, man in the woods, your mind automatically makes assumptions,
Yeah,
which is perhaps why the presumption of innocence exists in the legal systems. So yeah,
I mean I don't have a ton more to say. I think
yeah,
it is sublime. It is one of my favorite graphic novels that I own in terms of you could hand this to anyone and they could read it within an hour and be
yeah. Perhaps
blown
not
away.
younger readers.
No, no.
No, no, definitely not younger readers. But yeah, you could pretty much hand it to anyone over kind of like who would you say kind of the youngest person you'd recommend this to? So I'd say maybe 14.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
not too horrific. It's not like there's
it's
not a
not
bunch of
gory.
gore.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
not gory. Yeah,
And there's no like sexual violence or anything too over the top.
and there's no swearing either.
No,
So yeah,
which is actually an interesting point. But yeah, I would say like teenager, but I think it is an adult book in terms of the themes and the tone of it. You made me
yeah.
laugh when you were saying not for younger readers because I looked at the front cover and I was like that could be a kid's book, and then I flipped it around and it's the girl's legs with a bunch of flies all over them, and that's how you know it's
Yeah, 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 exactly. Yeah. Yes, this is yeah. Again, I kind of just echoing what you're saying. Very, very highly recommended. I don't want to say it's got a Wikipedia page, so obviously people have read it and has been noticed. But I think a lot, I think it deserves a much wider readership than perhaps it has.
yeah. I think over here in the states it should be in the conversations of when you're talking about
Well,
just graphic novels.
yeah, I think. I mean, it does say on the Wikipedia page it did receive an Eisner Award nomination in 2015.
A
But
nomination.
yeah, so
What beat it?
it's I have
I,
no idea.
I can't imagine what beat this, especially at least the Eisners recognized it. That's very good
Yeah.
because sometimes they'll miss European comics and things that aren't as close to home.
Okay, so it was a best US edition of international material. So that's a bit of a weird category.
That's a very odd category. I guess that's just for when they printed it in English. Then that's not.
Yeah,
Oh, is this 2015?
yeah, 2015.
It was beaten by Black Sad Amarillo.
Okay, fair enough. It's
That's
beaten by yeah. Okay, Black Sad is again a very different graphic novel, but again, absolutely excellent. We probably should do Black Sad at some point.
I freaking love Black Sad.
Yeah, we should probably do Black Sad at some point. So yeah, okay, I can't say that's a terrible graphic novel, but yeah,
No, I wouldn't say that either one is better than the other, but they're both
yeah,
fantastic.
yeah. So fair enough. So yeah, guys, that's a high recommendation
Oh yeah.
from me.
Same for me. I do want to say I didn't have my thoughts as in order as I would have liked because this is the second recording. So if I kind of skimmed some stuff and it was a little rougher than usual, I apologize for that.
Yeah. The other thing I think we mentioned in the previous recording is that the book might be slightly difficult to get hold of in the United States. So yeah, I'm not too sure. I think that obviously digital version is going to be easy to get hold of, but I think on Amazon, I think there's only a few copies left. So yeah, something to keep in mind.
I had forgotten about that. That is unfortunate.
Yeah,
Hopefully it'll get a reprint or something, but yeah.
yeah. Please reprint it. It's great graphic novel.
I think our next one is going to be Nottingham and Side Quest.
Yes, Nottingham Side Quest. Yeah. So we'll be reviewing that in the next episode. Yeah. Okay.
All right. See you then, guys. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, guys.